Thank you very much for coming to this conference today and for joining this parallel session on research perspectives and methods and why sex and gender matter. So we have with us to discuss on these topics Londa and Schibinger and Ineke Klinge that participated in the morning sessions as well. And to start the discussions, I would like to ask both Ineke and Londa two questions on how we can bring arguments to integrate sex and gender analysis into HBP. That is a project with many varied topics that are discussed and studied. And also if you have specific recommendations on how to integrate the gender and sex analysis into its research in the different domains, in addition to the two recommendations that were already raised in the morning session. And then to continue, I would open the floor to the participants, and so you can ask or discuss with Ineke and Londa about how you can, in your own research, integrate these two aspects, and or any other question you may have on this topic.
Okay. Shall I start?
Sure.
I think I would really like to hear what your questions are. So, but I'll say a couple of things. The topic. So, I don't know how the Human Brain Project works with the people who study sex and gender in neuroscience. I mean, I really don't know. So there are a number of people. Gina Rippon, for instance, from the UK, is one of the leaders in looking at this field of research. So I am not a neuroscientist. I can't say like how you should, do this exactly, but I think there are people who have lots of ideas about that. So I would really encourage your administrators or whoever does this to look into, there's a specific group of people who really look at sex and gender in the brain. I'd be happy to send the names, and you can see if you like these things. And so I don't know where you are in this and how you interact with the people who have this as their specialty. But I'd be happy to make connections. And then I think the question is, would you invite, if those people aren't part of the Human Brain Project, would you invite them in to do workshops or lectures, or how would you get them connected up to the particular teams so that it might be very useful? So, I mean, I'm a very pragmatic person. Let's go find the experts, and there are experts in this area, and they may then have particular suggestions about how to move forward.
Okay, is this,
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Well, of course, the argument, and the one and only argument, is about scientific excellence. So that's really the thing that is at stake. And I would advise for newcomers or people new to the field or to the idea that sex and gender analysis matter, to take the online training courses developed by the Canadians, the RGH project. They are very easy online trainings. They last about 30 minutes, divided in basic science, clinical science, and public health science. And there you get, in a very nice way, acquainted with the concept of sex and gender and the distinction, the conceptual distinction between the two, the way they interact. And well, it is an easy training. It's very well founded, for example, by using the training questions or the capacity building questions or whatever you might like to name it, on questions and examples from actual projects that were submitted to the review board. So it's based really with the feet in the mud, so to say. And they're short, they're concise, they're very well doable on the internet. They're free, and after each module you get a certificate that you have completed this course. And well, as an introductory, I don't know at the moment a better, smart, efficient, quick one existing. So I would advise that for any new person who would like, ooh, what is this sex and gender business, to take those courses.
Thank you.
Yes, I would agree with that. And one of my next stops on this little European tour I'm doing is at Nature magazine. So you're going to find out that not only is sex and gender important to excellent research, it's going to be important to get your things published, right? Because in the same way that the European Commission has put in requirements and suggestions for receiving money for research, the journals, the big journals, are going to be doing more with editorial, with guidelines for authors and for reviewers having to do with excellence in research, and sex and gender will be part of that too. So it's important in all aspects. You can also look at our methods. The Gendered Innovations website has basic methods. I recently, with 2 colleagues, published some guidelines for Lancet, the Lancet, and we have like 5 easy steps of what must be in an article. So you can look at these various things. I'd be happy to send resources to someone who wants to have resources. The NIH has also published some a couple of, like 2 really important articles for animal research. And one of them includes a decision tree. So first you have to decide how important, and this is for understanding sex as a biological variable, nothing to do with gender, which is much more complicated. It's a decision tree that if at the very first step you don't see sex differences, then you don't have to set up your experiment all the way through. But if you do see sex differences, then you really need to set up the experiment so you're going to understand in great detail what you're seeing. So these decision trees are a way to save money and resources, but to get the good information at the end. So that's also important. I guess maybe I'll say one more thing. I don't know if my website is still going over there. Our website.
Okay.
If it was one of my first co-directors. I just wanted to, while we're all here, it's important, we're talking about gender, and I think that people don't understand gender very well. So these are our methods, and we have this one, analyzing sex. So let me say just one important thing here. A lot of, popular science wants to see a male brain and a female brain, but as Katrin, as you were saying this morning, there's overlap, right, in these things. So if I take something just simple like height, we see that, yes, there are differences between men and women, and this would be true in the brain as well, especially because it's not only modulated by biology, but also by society, right? So you would have differences, but there's a lot of overlap. And so we certainly don't want to say there's a pink brain and a blue brain, right? You get these books, men are from Mars and women are from Venus, this sort of thing. We want to not fall into any of that, and I know you wouldn't. So we have, 4, 5 steps here that are important. But now let me just say about gender. So we start thinking about gender in interesting ways. We divide this into, it's in a different one, sorry. We divide this into gender norms, gender identity, and gender relations. So many people these days, when we talk about gender in society, they're really only talking about gender identity, right? How do you present yourself? What do you identify as? What is your social characteristic? But some of the most important things are gender norms. And for gender norms, these are the pressures, these are the things we need to change in society as a whole. And this is really the big opportunity of the Human Brain Project, is to not harden these norms, do not reinforce stereotypes, gender stereotypes, but open them up, and let's create more equality. So gender norms are the pressures that press on an individual, and because there's plasticity in the brain, because we're formed by our experiences and the neural networks are formed, we have to consider what is the influence of the workplace, what is the influence of family culture, institutional policy, all of these things. So I want you to at least think about gender as gender norms or societal pressures that we conform our behavior to, gender identity, which is the individual then forming his or her or their own identity, and then gender relations. That's the social and power relationships between people with different gender identities. So I don't know if the Human Brain Project is even beginning to look at gender. Are you only looking at biology?
I do not think so. I mean, not of course at the level as you are doing it, addressing it, but we have quite, I think, a strong cognitive science, cognitive neuroscience, and they are aware at least. I'm not aware of studies analyzing the interaction between sex and gender, so for sure not. I'm aware of many studies who do not include sex.
So we can start there.
But at least, I mean, gender is a topic. We are connected, for instance, to the large cohort studies also, and cohort studies, I mean, in the field of neuroimaging, and they, I mean, start to provide this information also.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any questions on what has just been explained, or about your own research and how to integrate?
I would be very interested in hearing about some let's say some examples where inspirational examples perhaps that can say, look, here's something that is really fascinating stuff when you look at gender, because I think what we have to do ultimately in the community, we have to inspire people and say like, like come from that angle and say like, look guys, this is really fascinating stuff, and you actually you're pushing the boundary here of what we know and how we can categorize knowledge, because that's really ultimately what it is. It really opens up a new category of interaction between existing knowledge and that really multiplies also the what we can think about, and that's really, and I think that's exciting to scientists, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think, is there something you can, like, off the top of your head kind of say, like,
well, we have 26 inspirational examples on the website in different buckets. So did you want to mention any of the things?
Well, I think well, of course, we have developed them together, but the most interesting ones and the most have the largest learning effects are, I think, the ones in the animal research, the health topics, where there are several. There is one case study on nutrigenomics, so the influence of sex and gender on non-communicable diseases, where there's a very nice elaboration of how gendered food intake, so gender norms influencing health behavior concerning food and exercise, etc., relevant risk factors for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, lung disease, etc. In the individual then become processed in a sex-specific way. So there you have a very basic example of how the two are intertwined, and that's interesting to study. And there's bits and pieces in for people who have already some gender knowledge, but also the ones who are really keen on issues of epigenetics and all those processes after,
I
stemming from the genomic basis.
mean, but I'm kind of passionate about this, is also mental health. I think mental illnesses, I would say, are strongly gendered in many ways, and understanding the differences here, and especially also when you want to talk about sex versus gender and see what the different influences are here. I mean, we're talking about depression, we're talking about eating disorders, we're talking about all kinds of things that are clearly in that space, and I think that would be really fascinating. And for us, I think an imperative thing to look at.
I agree, and especially because the Human Brain Project is in the Cognitive Neuroscience Project related to those, eventual developing diseases, etc. So far, in the Gendered Innovations Project, we do not have a case study on mental illnesses, which is a missing thing. But on the other hand, I think there are initiatives in member states. For example, in the Netherlands, we have a program on gender and health, where there's funding specifically for everybody to that program has to address sex and gender aspects. So it's a special program financed by the Ministry of Health. And there, one of the 12 topics is about mental health. So we have funded already a number of projects looking at sex and gender aspects of autism and the like.
So I guess my question is, I think we have a lot of, I have about a list of 6 things I would like to send someone in the Human Brain Project. Who would like to receive these more specific scientific papers that you might want to distribute in some way? I mean, that people might want to look at. Huh?
I'm very happy to, yes.
So you would receive them and sort through them, see what's relevant or not relevant? Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
I will distribute them yes, maybe we can do some filtering, indeed, depending on, I guess you mean the topic.
Yeah, I'm just thinking there should be some way I could send things when I find them also. I mean, things come up all the time, and then I could have a conduit say, this might be of interest, might not be of interest. I mean, here you go. This is what I found today. That sort
I'm
of
sure
thing.
there will be many people also interested in receiving it themselves without.
So Iniki and I, we tried to do a case study on something on gender and the brain some years ago.
Yeah.
And even among the gender experts, there was such disagreement. We had this nice little workshop in Paris, and by the end of a day and a half, people were not even having eye contact with each other. And these are all people interested in sex and gender. So we don't have a case study. I'm now thinking of doing one, which would, our case studies always try to inspire, and because we keep them short and to the point, it's just an example of how the research can be important. But this is just a really political thing. And so, good luck with that.
Is there anyone in the audience who is involved in one of the, I believe, the special projects 1 to 4, which are about the more basic and biological things? Who?
Lydia.
And what is your research question at hand?
Speaking about my research in particular, because I discovered that I probably made a mistake, but I will explain later. But for now, I have a practical problem. I analyzed the microanatomy of the brain, working with the synapse. Okay, I received the samples from human brains, and when I receive the samples, they are labeled as male or female. This is the only information regarding sex, but I don't have the gender information. So when I analyze the data regarding the microanatomy, I can only refer my results to the sex, not to the gender. So I'm missing a very important part of my research, because
What kind of, these are animal samples?
no, human samples. I am receiving human brain samples, real ones, I mean. And I work with normal brains.
Age, you need to know what geographic location.
Yes.
You need to know what social class they're from. You need to know their education. You need to know their child care. So we're trying to create this instrument to include gender in clinical trials.
Yes.
And we surveyed, obviously, all the gender literature, or however many 25 years or something, and we now have 7 variables that we think are very important for gender and health. And one of those is whose responsibility is the caring work for caring for children or adults. This is a big divide between men and women.
Yes.
And it's also a big kind of stressor, or it could be beneficial. I mean, we don't know which way, we're still doing research, but we find these kinds of factors are important. So knowing whether they're male or female is like...
It's nothing, yeah. But it's the only thing that I receive when I am collecting the samples, because I am a biologist, I work in basic science. So when I receive the samples are coming from a hospital, and I can't go to the hospital because it's not my job. So the doctors there, they are in charge of collecting the data, the clinical, social, and all the details that you have said. But sometimes they don't pay attention. And especially now I'm analyzing samples from Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's disease is particularly different, I mean, in terms of statistics between males and females. And I think I'm missing a very important part of the analysis. Considering I am realizing that I'm missing a lot. Yeah. It's terrible. Yeah. I mean, it's discouraging for me.
I mean, even when you're talking about animals, I was trying to emphasize you have these environmental factors, right? Even caging.
Yes.
For animals. And caging, caging, the females tend to cage together because that's cheaper, and then the males are often caged individually because they fight, that sort of thing. And the caging, which is not always reported in the study, can have impact on metabolisms and things, right? And it's not always taken into consideration. So that's just animals in a laboratory. Consider humans in society, right? Yeah, very important.
So if I may comment, I think there is really no chance to get such type of information which you would like to get from human body donors in terms of gender. So this is by many reasons. Yeah, you cannot analyze 100 of them. You do not have the documentation. So this is a way, how human beings are dying, how they donate their brains, and how it's coming to you. So you can only have, I think, very controlled and very focused studies on particular aspects. And if you consider sex, this is, in my view, this is already important. But my experience is that when you are considering sex as a variable in brain microstructure, then sample sizes of 10 are really the lowest what is possible because of the variability. And it's better to have 30 or 40, which is really a lot of work. And practically you won't do 100 or 200. But the question is, what is the appropriate experiment in order to address this? Yeah, so you may not answer the question in histology with respect to Alzheimer patients in the sense, but you might do, for instance, correlational studies between histology, post-mortem, and in vivo studies on the other hand. And you could do it through animal models, for instance. So if you find parameters that are indicative of a certain change in an imaging study where you can have hundreds or thousands of patients or subjects, and then you apply it to post-mortem, then you are in a better situation. But there is no brain collection anywhere in the world which gives you more than really the very rough facts, and you can be already happy if you have a disease diagnosis and so on. But you can address this through other studies. So it's a question really, what is the appropriate experiments to ask this question? So be open here, but human brain studies probably no. Gender you cannot directly address.
Hi, I'm working on rodents, so I'm involved in the sub-project 1, and I completely agree that it's mandatory to work on both sexes, especially because at synaptic level, there are another type of cell that are the microglial cell that are really dependent on gender. And I think that first we should include in the Human Brain Project also this type of cell, because especially in neurodegenerative disease such as Alzheimer's disease, microglial cells have a key role, at least at upstream, not downstream, that are the neuron, that there is the degeneration of neuron, but because there is a microglial cell that maybe that they are doing bad, like the pruning or the phagocytosis of neuron. And I will support to start to work also on female, on mouse or brain organization, and also to keep in consideration this type of cell that are strictly dependent on gender issue. And there are also different experimental evidence and that show this. And regarding also the cage that you are talking before, also at working with murine, we can manage by working with enrichment of the cage. So just give more stimulating the ambient, the rodent society, I mean, and so also this we should keep in consideration when we do our experiment.
So would it be, I'm not sure how this project works from day to day, but you might want to organize some kind of, so like what you were saying, could you give a seminar for other people in this project who would benefit or be interested in what you know and find about sex differences? You could either have an in-house seminars, you know, over lunch is always popular. It's a, you know, a twofer. But so at Stanford, what we do when we try to stimulate this kind of research, we offer seed grants to researchers to add the sex and gender component. And then if you get one, you are required to give a seminar. So there are seminars, I don't know if they're once a month or something like that, that all of these researchers who got the money would be listening to other colleagues, and obviously other people can come. So that's an in-house way to do it. I have wanted that we make as a requirement to receive that seed money that they take the Canadian trainings, but I have been overruled on the advisory committee, but it would be really interesting if you could kind of incorporate, okay, we're going to give extra money, but take this training, give us your certificate, and you get the money, right? And then you have these seminars where you exchange information. We have another, I mean, I'm part of the Humanities Center at Stanford this year, and this is our model. All the fellows, once a week, we have a research talk. And all the fellows, our common theme is humanities, but you could make your common theme whatever it is, and a research fellow or professor or whoever gives the talk, and you have some time then to discuss. Another model would be for you to bring in particular experts who work on, you know, whatever your team is focused on. You could bring some world expert on sex and gender in that area and have a small colloquia. But it's something, you need to really, have bubble up and so people have these inspirational examples, right? So they know when something is really important. One of the people at Stanford who got one of these seed grants is a graduate student named Amy Brown. They're in a neuroscience lab and they focus on autism. And their lab threw on female mice. They'd always done male mice, and the director threw on female mice because he thought, okay, this is important, got to get ready for NIH, that sort of thing. But then they didn't analyze any of the data. But she decided she would analyze some of the data, and she found really important things in the developmental process, in utero kind of process, and I'm sorry I can't reproduce it because I don't know enough about it. But she also has now a lifetime of research. It's like it started a new foundational research line in what she's doing. So I do think that this is a good model for getting these things going.
In the project, we also, well, in addition to the sub-projects that are dealing more with the biology and aspects of neuroscience itself, we also have the platforms. So we are developing technology, building platforms to do simulation work. So I don't know if we have anyone in the among the attendees that want to share their experience and see how they can integrate this, the sex and gender into the technology part of the project.
Okay, I don't want to hawk this in any way, but I've been a little bit involved in thinking about the platforms and what they could do, and I'm not a specialist in any way. I just want to mention that, so any stupidity is perfectly mine. But I think the question is absolutely relevant, and what we're doing in the project is really this marriage between biology and high-performance computing in the widest sense. Really, that's kind of what it is, right? That's also the policy goal of this project in a very wide sense. What it means, though, and I think it's something that is insanely important, is that because we are actually building an infrastructure, we are cementing certain things if we're not careful about eliminating those things, or at least make them transparent. And I want to go back to something that you discussed, Londa, earlier. I think is really this reproducing of biases. Let's say the problem with this is the benefit of what we're doing is we can do extremely high scaling analysis, but what we're doing with that, we're also extremely highly scale the biases in that. So there's like an amplification happening, like all the other mistakes that are in there, all the other bugs that are in there, we amplify them, and that is one of them that we also amplify. And if we're blind to that, we're actually, especially in the type of research we're doing, we're actually like making it way worse than if we were doing just like a linear kind of type of work, right? You can imagine like you're holding a laser pointer. If you hold that very close to there's nothing much happening. But if you point it over there and you shake a little bit, you have like 2 meters of something happening. And I think that's really what needs to happen. And it goes into the whole idea of having this benchmarked and make sure that we know how this works on different levels. And speaking of our big challenge, the multi-level organization of the brain, we're looking at this aspect, this question, we should look at it on every level. And that's kind of also how we can intellectually kind of organize this, right? We're looking at it on a molecular level, on a cellular level, on the genetics, but also then on the behavioral level, right? And that's where the things actually kind of meet. And because we are the brain project, we have those feedback loops in there that others don't. And I think also that really kind of puts us in a very specific spot and gives us a lot of responsibility. And honestly, coming out of this, this morning, basically, I gotta say I'm a little bit, what is the right word? A little bit shocked that we haven't put more thought into this as a system. I know that in the individual disciplines, it's there. I mean, I'm not saying that at all. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. But like as a project, as a system, we haven't really done our job there. And I think this is certainly something that we need to look at.
Yeah, I think this problem of amplification is just huge. I mean, so I would just say, yes, all of this is really important. So I don't know what concrete steps you can take to get the process started or to continue the process. I'm all about concrete steps. I like to know what's coming first. And, you know, you always have to take the step that's most acceptable to the scientists or whoever's doing the work so that they understand why it's important or take a lead from them, right? And then amp it up so that people can really benefit from this. You don't want any extra work or busy work.
Awareness is number one.
I know. Yeah, well, here's a little inspirational story I'll tell you because I heard this last week. We have a scientist in the medical school who studies C. elegans. Do you know these little worm things? And she studies aging. This is a 2014 Nature paper. She found that if you just have females in the Petri dish, they tend to live forever. Their species strategy is, okay, we're just going to exist. If you put males in with the females reproduce and then die. And I suppose that's their species strategy that, okay, now we're going to, reproduce and then move on so the next ones can reproduce. And they didn't say what happens if all males are in the Petri dish. So just something as simple as a sea worm, right? And it really matters if you have males or females. And if you're studying aging and only doing one of those groups, you're just going to have completely the wrong start, right? The wrong start of the research. So I'm going to find her paper. Somebody told me about this over the phone, and I'm going to find the paper. And and I'm going to search her out and understand everything about it. It sounds really interesting. But I think, the human brain is just so much more complicated. It's not clean little stories like that. It's all the feedback loops and all that sort of thing. But I think you have such an opportunity, right, to do something really great.
Or to lead by example.
Yes.
as our former Director General of DG Research and Innovation that was his mantra. So.
We are reaching the end of this session. Do you have more questions that you want to ask? No? Otherwise, I thank you very much.
People want coffee, I think.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Coffee, and then we'll have more questions.
Yeah. During the coffee break. And yes, I will be happy to receive the documentation.
Yeah, so if you give me your card or something. Mm-hmm.
And then I can share it with the consortium, and I'm sure also people will contact you individually to ask for more information on this. Good. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Good.